Welcome to the first Real Talk Food Safety of 2024.
Woo! Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
As you can see, I'm Jill and Tia, and we have our guest Cara with us today. We are so lucky to kick the year off with you, Cara.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be asked and invited. It is just great pleasure.
Yes, we are excited about you being here and excited about the topic.
I am too.
Science.
And I think we're all really passionate about it, right?
I know, and there's no better way to kick off the new year than something we're passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. That's how we hope to spend all of 2024, right? Like immersing ourselves in the things that we're passionate about.
Absolutely.
Minimizing the things that we're not so passionate about.
Right. That is probably more important, right?
Right.
Well, and if you're joining us, we of course would love to hear what are you passionate about for 2024, and share where you're joining us from. So drop it in the chat. We love to see and share, and that way it also allows for you to connect with others that are tuning in today too.
Yeah, absolutely. And add your comments, your questions. We'll be sure to cover them throughout the show, as well as adding your perspectives, right? Because you have a perspective working in the industry, and we also love to learn from you. So please add those in the comments.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yes. And, you know, we are going to talk about, like we said, women in science. And of course, we're going to touch on some other things because having Cara here with this your amazing background and experience and, you know, all the things. So we get to hear and share about like, what are the questions people want to have? What are the new perspectives people have? Like, how are we helping together to like elevate standards in this industry for each other?
I agree. It's so important, and that's exactly why we start the conversation, right? Just start the conversation and don't be afraid to ask. And that's what I'm hoping too. One of the reasons we're having the Women in Science webinar series is because we just want people to just ask questions and not be so afraid to ask questions. When I was starting out in this industry, I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, and I'm sure we talked a little bit about this yesterday in the prep, and clearly even my career direction has, proven that it's like, well, that looks good, it's like squirrel.
Yeah. It's like the things we wish we knew or we wish someone told us, right? Because some of it's through experience, but if we could learn through others or at least hear other perspectives, right? Yeah. How much it's like an easier start, a head start almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, there's no greater gift than having people share their stories.
Yeah.
And the parts that speak to them, the parts that they're ready to share, can share, like that perspective is a gift.
Yeah.
I agree. So as we dive in today, like so honored that you're going to share some stories, but then also hopefully others will feel when they know the timing is right to share their stories as well, and which parts of those.
So. Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly, I mean, that's why I always want to share I'm pretty much an open book and like try to share things because I think it's important. Like my career wasn't always, on the up and up, and it wasn't always, bright stars and shiny things. It was tough. It was tiring. I was tired a lot of the time. And I think that's what you have to, I think social media sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, look, they're doing so great. But you have to understand it takes a lot of work and effort and trials and turbulations and failures. And it's okay. It's okay. You just get back up, dust off, and keep moving. So.
Yeah, so we're going to cover a lot of that today. Cara, you brought up the webinar series. I know we're going to talk about it throughout this conversation because it's a part of it. But just tell us just a little bit about it since you brought it up, just because your audience is probably like, ooh, I want to know a little bit more about it. Just tell us a little bit about what is this webinar series that you're talking about?
Yes, no, I'm super excited about this. And I'm so fortunate that I was able to, we were just talking about how you ask people questions. And I asked these 4 awesome women that are in science, Dr. Kathy Glass from UW-Madison, Melody G from StarKist, and then Mindy Brashears from Texas A&M, Texas Tech. I always that. Yeah, I'm sorry. And Angie Siemens from Cargill, and they are just powerhouses in the food industry and the food safety industry. And basically, the series, it's just going to be every Friday in February, hosting a informal webinar. It's informal, where they're just going to tell us what they did, how they did it, where they came from, what are their backstories, what's their education, what would they have done different, what would you like to tell the younger generation of upcoming scientists to do, what not to do, maybe. And they don't have to heed advice. I sure didn't as a young kid. But it's just a way to communicate and have them be able to be accessible, right? Yeah. For just telling their stories and brag. I mean, Kathy Glass has an amazing history and an amazing accomplishments. Yeah. So let's give her kudos and let's let her brag and not be so humble. So.
I love that. And we'll have a link for you all to sign up for them. I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about it today, but because you brought it up, I wanted to make sure people knew what is this webinar series and how do I be a part of it. So thank you.
Well, thank you for letting me share it. I appreciate it. And I'm hoping to share it wide and far, right? Just anybody and everybody that wants to sign up, I think it'd be just amazing. So, although I'm going to be selfish, I would love to have a lot of one-on-one time with those ladies too.
Yes.
Hey, why not, right? That's what makes part of it fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We're so glad to have you on our Real Talk Food Safety show. And Tia and I do this pretty much every week on Wednesday, noon Eastern, 11 Central, because we started Catalyst so that we can help transform how we lead in food. You may be wondering why. Well, if you work in food for a hot minute, it's tough. Right? There are a lot of things that can be challenges, but we often focus on the technical side of our competencies, which is really important. Like we all have this amazing technical prowess that we can, be proud of. But the other part that we tend to not put as much focus or time in developing or even thinking about is our leadership development.
Yeah.
And when we talk about leadership, it's not just about like, hey, I have the official title. How do I be a leader? It's like the leader that's in all of us. Yeah. And recognizing how we are worthy and deserving of standing in our power so that we can be the best humans we can be. Wow. And that's why we're so happy to have guests like Cara on with us to talk about how do we do this collectively in a community.
Yeah.
Because at Catalyst, we do that through programs. So head out to our website. You can check out some of our programs. We have a vision board workshop coming up next week on the 10th. It's going to be awesome. Sign up. We also have a technical leader boot camp starting in February because we are committed to helping people step into that power and doing it in a different way through coaching-based programs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So nice to meet you. Happy New Year. And we're excited that you are here with us.
Yes. And you know what? I want to start off. I know we kind of jumped in right away, but Cara, I don't know if all of our audience knows you.
Oh,
would you even share the honor of introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what got you here? How did you become interested in food safety? Because we know this is, crazy, sexy area to be in. So what draws people here? And even in a more precise area, you've spent a lot of time even in sanitation.
Mm-hmm. Which is even sexier. Let's real, right?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. I'll give you my little elevator speech. It's so funny. I think I was watching Brian Armitrout's webinar last Friday, his food safety chat last Friday, and he was talking, and his guest was talking about, well, I fell into it. I too fell into it. I was going for my undergrad. I graduated from University of Wisconsin-Madison in bacteriology and genetics, and I was actually working in a lab, but I was working in a silage lab. So it was kind of unique. We were actually harvesting forage. So I'd go out on the fields. Little 19-year-old kid going out in the fields harvesting this forage, and then we'd ensile it into little glass jars or into PVC pipe. It sounds really funny, and what that means is we're just making silage for animals. And so we would try to isolate the bacteria that would break it down into more protein, and the more protein you had, more for the cows, so then they would produce more milk. So it seems like we're all connected, right? Farm to fork. And I was kind of in food. I was in animal food essentially. And when I graduated, I was like, oh my gosh, now what? And the lady that was, and my last semester I took food science or food safety or a food microbiology class. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Like we made sauerkraut and all that kind of stuff. This is so cool. If I could stay in this would be really cool. And one of the ladies that worked in the lab, the silage lab, actually started working at DuPont and got me an internship there in probiotics. And back in 1995, everybody was like, probiotics, what's that? And it was really interesting. I got to learn all about fermentation. I was awful though. This is where my elevator speech is going a little bit sideways here. But they had these fermenters, and I would contaminate them all the time.
Oh no!
So we'd come in, and it was supposed to be, it was like all contaminated, and it was like, oh, it was terrible. And my boss would just be like, just do it over. I just wasn't. Ironically, I was just not cleaning it well enough.
So you learned something about sanitation early on.
Very early. Yes. I was like, oh my gosh. And they didn't have a position. So they wanted to hire me, but they didn't have a position. So I actually ended up getting a job at Diva Labs, which was the laboratory that DuPont was using for, so again, all connected, don't make anybody mad. So I ended up at Diva Labs doing routine chemistry or routine microbiology, loved it. Worked with some amazing people, but then was hired at Oscar Mayer. And that's where I feel like, you guys have awesome boot camps for leadership. That was my boot camp. That was, it was just go girl, just do it, figure it out. My first couple weeks there, I was in a slaughter facility. I'd never seen slaughter before. I was like, oh my, there's turkeys flying everywhere and everything. And it was just a lot of learning microbiology, learning food safety. That was when the mega reg was put into play, learning how HACCP works and becoming a HACCP trainer. Yeah. And so I was there for about 8 years. And then I was reorged out, which is fine. And that's another one where, you land on your feet. And unfortunately, through my connections with Diva Labs, I was able to, Dr. Virginia Dibel had opened a laboratory track in Madison, tiny lab, maybe 6 people, 8 people. And I joined there part-time. And at that point, I had 2 small children. So when I was at Oscar Mayer, I gave birth to my son, and he was actually premature. So we had a lot of complications with that. And then my daughter was born. And so she was about 2 and my son was 4. And I was pregnant with my 3rd child, and it was a really wild time. And it was so nice though, because she said, well, I can give you 4 hours a month. And then it turned into my first week, I worked 8 hours. And then the second week I worked 10, and that was in August. And then in October I was full time. So it was just kind of wild, but yeah, it was. And then we were purchased by Covance, and then Covance was purchased by Eurofins. So my time there was 11 years, and I was doing all kinds of quality consulting, training, and it's kind of one of those things where you don't want to say yes to too much, but it's good to say yes to different things and get out of your comfort zone. And it was a lot of fun. It was hectic. I would put my kids to bed at 7 o'clock at night. I'd work until about 3 in the morning a lot of times, and then I'd get up and do it all over again because I was home with them, and I worked from home before it was cool.
You had all this down before anybody knew they were going to need it.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, what's the problem? We got this. And then I was lucky enough to join Hydrite Chemical Company a couple of years ago and was their food safety program manager there. And then now I've joined ChemStation as their director of food safety. And always, obviously with food safety, always have been in sanitation, tied with sanitation, but now really getting into the nitty-gritty and the deep roots of sanitation and how important it is. If we can focus on that and make sure that we're applying the right programs in sanitation, it's going to help you in the long run, right? It's going to really, if you're not starting clean, you're not going to end clean.
Right.
Yeah. So that's I know that was a lot. And somewhere in there, I got an MBA too. That was, it's like, and like all of a sudden, it's like 30 years. And
like that.
Yeah.
But what a cool career, right? So far. I mean, you're not even done, right? Like, we're not talking to you when you're retired and you're like, yep, I'm done, but like you are on this path and have gone through a lot, from starting as a 19-year-old, right? Having kids, getting a higher education degree, changing organizations, using your network that you've built along the way to get to where you are today. And to your earlier point, right? Like, if you knew some of the things that you know now, would it have been smoother transitions? I don't know. At least maybe come up the speed faster, right? Or maybe made different decisions, or maybe, right? It's all of those pieces that, as people in the industry being able to connect and share and ask those questions and have people in your network is just so important. And I hear that as you kind of told your story of your career over the years.
Absolutely. And good mentors. I could not have asked for better mentors in my life. And just, I mean, Dr. Virginia Dybel, seeing that, okay, well, I can have her work for me, but she has to work from home because her kids, although I brought my kids into the lab sometimes, not in the lab, but into the office. And you think about that now, and it's like, it was, at the time I was like, come on, guys, we're going to the office, and it's, it was an experience. And actually, my daughter, my middle child, just got accepted to optometry school, and her letter to the school included that experience as a child.
Wow.
Yeah, she said that going to my mom's work and seeing the lab and working around science and everything really spurred me to want to get into science.
Wow.
So,
I feel like that's something to like just remember as women. Like, we have this very unique position to be mothers, and sometimes kids need to come with us, but like that is shaping who they're going to be in the future. And that's actually a really positive thing to see what your parents do, right? To be we're science nerds, and so I love to like surround my daughter with science, right? Kind of hoping to shape her into going the science path. We know that works sometimes, but at least she has this experience in her mind to say, oh yeah, I've seen a lab before, or I've seen working parents or working people in general, right? And I have this, and that's what kind of fueled my passion so that I can do what I'm passionate about in the future. And it's like, if you didn't do that, right? Like, I don't know.
Right.
We have
right, exactly. And science isn't scary, right? I think sometimes we get a little afraid when we think about science and just the aspect of it, and it can be challenging, right?
Mhm.
And I think sometimes kids shy away from it because it
Yeah.
is. And by bringing her, into that environment, they were exposed from a very young age. I started at track when my youngest was 3 weeks old, so she went there a lot, and she was just along for the ride. But she got to see it and respect it too, and understand it. So, but it was, there was one time where we were making cookies, and she she was 6, and she said to me, she goes, "You guys got to take E. coli out of flour and salmonella out of eggs so that I can eat cookie dough again."
That's amazing.
No normal 6-year-old says that. And I was impressed. She got the E. coli for the flour and the salmonella for the eggs.
Right. She's been paying attention.
A on that risk assessment. Boom. No.
Yeah, that is awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, so Cara, even as you think about, like, that's an incredible path.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, along the way, like, what surprised you most about being in this industry, and or about your career as you went along?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I mean, I think I wish I wouldn't have been so afraid of things. I know that sounds silly, but like I did get an MBA. I love education. I love educating myself. I love all of that. And my one regret is that I really would have loved to have gone for a PhD at some point. But with 3 kids and a job and the expense, I was afraid. I was afraid to do it. And I wish I would have taken more risks with that kind of thing. And I think too, I was always afraid to switch jobs and to switch, careers. And I remember getting into sanitation. I'm like, I'm not a sanitation expert. Like, this is scary. This is gonna, but I thought, no, this is an awesome opportunity. The people are amazing. I have to give it a shot. And oh my God, I never look back. It was just an amazing opportunity. And that's where I think a lot of times, especially as women, we think we have to be an expert at something in order to get into that. And it's like, no, you don't have to you don't have to know everything, but it's good to know people that know you, or more that you can reach out in your network.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, even as you talk about that, like, you're right. I think many people and women, right, we're afraid to step out into the unknown, or to go for the higher degree, or to change jobs. I mean, those conversations, like, you hear often. What would you say helped you make that decision in your career? And I'll add a second one on what helped you and what could have helped you make it
right,
or make it when you felt like, man, I like a PhD, right? Like, is there something that could have helped you make that decision to go, or to say, no, I'm not going to do the PhD?
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think for me, it was fear that kept me from fear of not finishing, fear of getting in and failure, fear of failure. And so I think, like, for me, for switching jobs, it was, it was encouragement from my network, from a lot of my mentors. I reached out to them and just said, what do you think? And most of them were like, you have to do what's right for you. But I agree with that. But, they were like, if you think it's a good opportunity, if it's in your gut, go for it. And I think that's the biggest thing. And again, I'm very risk averse. And to take that risk for me was huge, but it paid off tremendously. It was just an awesome way to continue my career. So that's what I think, at going through a layoff too, I was terrified. I had two little kids at home, and I honestly, I didn't know what I was going to do. And that's where you have to dig deep in yourself and really just say, wait a second here. Okay, I got this. I can figure this out. And that's why I give Virginia Dybel a lot of credit. I mean, she's amazing. And she saw that I had, I had passion and potential, and I still wanted to continue my career. And she really helped me to shape that. So I give her all the credit in the world. And she was always my biggest cheerleader. So that, and she started her own business in her own lab. That's amazing. So it was a lot. It was a lot.
That's a great cheerleader to have.
Absolutely. And to this day, still a great cheerleader. So.
That's so awesome.
It is. And as you talk about fear, I think, and not to make that fear small, but like fear is such a driver for so many people. And it shows up differently for everyone.
Yeah.
And depending on even the stories that go with it. So I know yesterday during our prep call, Cara, you and I were talking about, right? Like the message we kind of had from our families when we were younger was like, you just need to have a job. Right? You should just be grateful to have a paycheck. It wasn't about like, is it something you love to do? Is it something that fills you up? Is it something that's good to you?
Yeah.
It wasn't anything about like, what we deserve. I mean, like that we were deserving. Right. It was more like, wow, you should be so grateful. And not that we weren't, but right in this relationship, it's so nice to see over time how some of the power in the employee-employer relationship are shifting a little bit in certain areas so that people are being more valued. And granted, that's dependent on where you're at and the culture and who you're with. But man, that fear is real.
It is. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. And part of it is, and not to, my parents were loving, amazing parents. I'm so lucky to have them. It's just, they were teachers. And so they weren't in the same world that I was in. Yeah. And so they were super encouraging, but absolutely, when I got the job at Oscar Mayer, they're like, wow, you're set. This is awesome. Yes. This is a great job. And it was absolutely an amazing job. But it's a little different nowadays with the, just, a lot of times you don't have that same where somebody joins a company and it's 40 years later. That's more of an anomaly than the expectation. So. Yeah. And not that doesn't happen, because you see those retirements all the time, and holy cow, amazing. Good for them.
Yeah, but things are shifting, and so we have to also shift the way that organizations have to shift the way that they're doing work, because those things are shifting.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Cara, you brought up a few times on like using your network, and like even as we talk about this shift, right? Like having people there. Mentorship, right there, sponsorship, as you think about being in an organization. How would you advise someone to find a mentor or to expand their network?
So this is, I completely remember this. I was probably 30 years old, and I was at IAFP, and a lady, and I believe she's retired now, but Anna Lamberding is her name. And she was kind of integral in IAFP. She pulled me aside and she said, volunteer. She said, volunteer, do stuff, that's how you increase your network. And I do have to say that is, obviously recognize your bandwidth, but volunteering has increased my network so much. And just going to those trade shows, if you're able to, and things, and not being afraid to just reach out and say, hey, I have this question. I'll read a paper, I'll have a question, reach out to the author. That's how you expand your network, and that's how you can do it. But volunteering is a great way to expand your network.
Yeah.
And it can be really fun too, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've met people that I would not have, because I'm very involved in the Wisconsin affiliate of IFT, and then IAFP, and it's a great way to expand your network. So, but that would be my recommendation. I thought that was a great. I'll never forget when she said that to me, because I was like, because at the time I was like, what do you mean? And then as you get older, you're like, oh,
right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think that's great. That's great advice, because then now you're starting to talk to different people, right? And work with different people. Like you said, people that you probably would not have even met if you hadn't volunteered for a committee or volunteered to do some work here or whatever it happens to be.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Well, and I think the other part that you added on there was like leverage those people that you know.
Yeah.
So often, because we think we have to know, or like we have to find it on Google or find it on our own, we forget, like, actually you could still like pick up the phone or send an email. Even, well, last week I'd gotten a question from someone. I was like, I'm not sure. So I went to this network of women that I have, and I'm like, what do you think?
Yeah.
So I think it's also making sure you reach out, because like we talked about right before the show, like, we're all human.
Yeah.
Like, if there is a way that we can provide some support or ask a different question for you to perhaps have a different perspective, like that's what we're all here for. Because like the collective success of all of us raises everything.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And again, that here comes the fear, right? You're afraid, well, what are they going to be mad at me for asking? I've not met anyone that's ever been mad at me for asking a question about their journal article or their, a trade association article. I've been happy to that somebody read it. Right?
Exactly. I tell people, like, people don't say no to helping others. It's very rare. And even if they can't help, they're going to connect you with someone that can help. And so, like, it's really a getting over that fear of rejection or not feeling good enough, or and right. Whatever is unique to that person, stepping through that and saying, hey, I'm gonna reach out. And hopefully that person will be in my network, and you might make this amazing connection that turns out to be, whatever, right? Your book club, or your yearly travel, or someone that you can call on for microbiology. Like, you never know how those relationships are going to play out, but you have to first take that first step.
You do. Yep, you do. And again, in just talking, I think, especially as women, a lot of times we suffer from like imposter syndrome, where I'm afraid that people aren't going to, I'm not worthy of talking to them, kind of thing. And it's like, I don't know, I've done a bunch of stuff, nothing like outstanding, but I'm here and it's fun and I'm, doing it. And I don't, it's like, I don't pump up my resume at all. It's like, this is what I've done.
Right, exactly. And we're all capable of learning. Right. And we're all capable of learning and expanding and growing. Like, we've proven that. And so even if you do get in a position where it's like, okay, this is a stretch, we can stretch, right? We can learn. We have that ability.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that also goes back to that whole, like, asking what you need. Or even asking about that, because as we talk about, especially, like, how do we help people, like more women, see themselves in science? It's not that we don't want men here. So if you're here, we need men. We want men. We want men to be here for allies. We want women to be allies for men, all of it. But we do know that the more representation we have and the more diversity in voices, like, the bigger the problems are that we can solve and the better we can do it.
Yeah.
So, right, when we, like, especially with women, I think sometimes we forget, like, it's okay to ask for what you need, or even just ask questions to learn information.
Yeah.
I think we had talked about even, like, starting in our careers, like, did we know to ask for promotions? Did we know we could ask for, perhaps, let's say if we're starting families, like, time off for that? Or, I think sometimes we always think of people with families needing time off, but even as an individual, like, sometimes you need time off.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do we take how do we encourage people, and I'm going to say especially women, because that's kind of what we're talking about today,
Yeah.
to use their voice and to ask those questions to get what they need.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. And it's a hard thing, right? That is a very hard thing. And I had told, in the prep, the story about when I was at Oscar Mayer, my son was born 3 months premature, and his first year was a struggle because he had health issues being born prematurely, and he had got pneumonia 3 times within a year. Was a full-time working mom, and trying to recover myself because I was very ill from the birth. It was a struggle, and I finally went to my boss and I just said, I can't do this. I'm stretched. I'm almost broken.
Yeah.
And they allowed me to go part-time, because and we know it wasn't going to be a permanent part-time, but it was a part-time because he said, and his Joe Meyer said, I'd rather have you here 100% of the time part-time than than here 100% of the time and only putting in 10% of the effort because you're broken. And I'm like, wow. Yeah, I mean, but that's a culture, right?
Yeah.
It's a culture. But I thought but if I wouldn't have asked,
Right.
I probably would have just quit. Yeah, or I would have just, found, or I would have just broken down. I would have been, which would have been worse. So.
In either of those cases, right, you quitting or breaking down, you're not getting what you need, and the organization is definitely not getting what they need either.
Right. Exactly.
So understanding, and we talk about this all the time as we talk about cultures and helping organizations shift their cultures, so that they can take care of their people. That's a part of it, is understanding what do their people need and how do you meet them there, so that when they are there, they're there 100%. Engaged 100%, doing the work that they need, because it doesn't help anyone if you're there but not engaged, right?
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Well, and that's the bringing it up to the whole being well-being.
Yeah.
It's not just, can you show up at work and do the work here, but do you still have energy for the other areas of your life?
Yes.
Right.
Can you still do the other things that bring you joy, so that when you come to work, you also find joy? Because we're not just going to shut that little faucet off.
Yeah.
And I think, even as we talked about that, as people are going through, like, as leaders, how do we even notice those things? Because I don't know, Cara, about you, but like I probably wouldn't even think it was an option to ask. Like, if I haven't seen it done before, I wouldn't know it was even a possibility. And so sometimes when we're leaders, like, how do we pause and notice and have those relationships with our team members to really understand what they need in these moments, whether it's a short term, a long term, a just today thing, or maybe it's for the week, maybe it's for the next 6 months. But what are some of the things that we need to look for and be able to observe and really like know our team members, so that we can step into that role to really support them in those areas?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
That's a great point. And it's a skill, right? It's a skill. And I do understand, and again, kind of going back to, like, I do understand businesses need to make money, right? Like they have to make money. And I understand there are certain expectations in a job that you have to do, and you have to perform in order to meet those expectations, right? So I'm not saying, like, you can, not do your job or things like that. But you're absolutely right. It isn't worth it. It is not worth it to have somebody who is there not mentally and not passionate about their work. If then you're not going to get that productivity out of them.
Right. Exactly.
And it's just not going to be a productive person.
Yeah. It's a business case to ensure that your people are engaged.
Exactly. And passionate and want to promote your company too. I think that's another thing, I think that's a really important thing too. And the way that you treat them and help them grow.
Yeah.
And try to figure out how to make them passionate, or hope that fuel their passion.
Yeah.
for their job and for the company.
Yeah.
I think that's important. So, but it's a skill. And Jill, I wish there was like a magic button, right?
Easy button, so we can just push that thing.
Yeah. Well, I know your programs will help a lot, but if I find a magic button, I'll send it over. But
I think it's kind of that other part too. Like a lot of organizations have these foundations, these systems where these weren't parts of the system before, right? Like offering part-time or having that as an option, or offering flex hours, or perhaps remote work if possible. So, some of those systems are things that we, as we have more experience, as we can look at those, like how do we help set some easier roads for those coming after us?
Yeah.
I agree. Yes, that's a really important, and it isn't necessarily going to be, okay, this SOP, step 1, step 2. I wish it were, right? But yeah, and I do think it has to be a culture, right? It has to be a culture and programs and things like that meet that culture.
Yeah. And I think a piece of moving in that direction is making sure, right, you have that diversity, like what Jill was talking about, so that different voices will be at the table. And I would love for you to share this story with your audience on when you realized that you were the only woman in the room.
I was at Oscar Mayer, and granted, this was in the late 1990s, which somebody said to me, "You were in the 1900s." I'm like, yeah, I guess I was. Born in the 1900s. It doesn't seem that long ago. But yeah, it was. I would just go to meetings, and I was in meetings, and we had an intern that had started, Adam Borger, who's not with the Food Research Institute. And one day he looked at me and he goes, "How come you're the only woman in any of these meetings?" I had never noticed. I really honestly had never ever even considered it, but I met with a lot of engineers and product developers and things like that, and yeah, it was growing. It was definitely growing, and I was really fortunate to work in the microbiology and food safety area, which did have quite a few women in it, but they were at other locations, and yeah, it was eye-opening for me. I was like, oh. Because I just didn't even think about it. I'm like, well, I have a meeting at 10. I gotta go.
So that's so funny, and kudos, right, for him to, even as an intern, be able to see, right, like, like this is not really a diverse group of people, and just to be able to notice that, right? That you can make different decisions in the future. But even just from your story of becoming a mom and, going through complications with your son and all of that piece, like the organizations would not have even had that perspective on what to offer, a mom or a dad or a parent, right, that's going through something like that. They wouldn't even have that perspective if you weren't there, right? Having those conversations, asking for what you need. And that's how cultures start to change, right? Like when you have those voices, people are noticing, we're asking for what we need, so that leaders, right, can see it and say, okay, we need to put something in place to help shape our culture, so that people, as they come in, will know that we're here to also prioritize their well-being.
Right, exactly, 100%, and that spans all genders and it's all diversity, and it's so important because obviously we're talking women in science, but it's a need for all, for having that understanding of their needs. And it's so important, and it makes the workplace a much better place for all.
It does.
It
does. So I'm curious, after that moment, is there a time that you did notice that you were the only woman in the room?
Well, after that, I was like, well aware. hadn't noticed that before.
Right.
But yeah, after that, then I was more aware, but I was also more aware when there were lots of women in the meeting and things like that. And looking back, like our department itself had a lot of women, a lot of powerhouse women like Lori Ledenbach of craft, and just power, Deb Rufai of craft, and they were some powerhouse women in science. So that was really cool, and that's what you started noticing, right?
Yeah.
Like wow, I'm really surrounded by some really awesome women. So that was cool. That was really cool. But yeah, I did after that I was like, oh. But I guess and even now I will notice it, but I won't put any emphasis on it. It's like, well, I'm here. So I'm here for a reason. There's some reason that I'm in this room, and I will hopefully I'll be able to contribute and like you say, it's just having that diversity increase our efficacy. So.
Yeah.
And there is a gap. So if anyone's familiar with the Females in Food group, Angela Dodd had started that group because she was advocating for how do we move more women into leadership decision-making positions.
Yeah.
Because 80% of buying choices in a household are done by women, but women only hold 20% of leadership roles in food organizations.
Oh.
And so it's really fascinating to think about. So I don't know about you, but I feel like every day on my LinkedIn social, probably my algorithm has picked it up, or even Facebook, but I see something on like girls in science and STEM and like this drive for STEM. So, I'm curious, even as you've thought about like going through your career and with your girls and family, right? It's almost like we have these different stages. Like, how do we help girls be interested in science? How do we get them into the field? How do we keep them here? But then how do we also elevate them into decision-making roles? That's a lot.
That is a lot.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Boy, and that is a great, and I have never really even thought about that type of progression, right? Because you assume it happens. You assume, but it's not apparently, and boy, and again, I think this goes back to probably culture and education and again, not that fear that we've been talking about, just not being afraid to make decisions and to voice your opinion and to make your opinion count. Even if you aren't a leader, even if you aren't considered a leader in your organization, your decisions matter. And that, I think that's important, and making sure, again, having that boss that is gonna pump you up and be confident in you. Going to be important. And then once you get into that leadership position, you need to take that. You need to be that for those people that are coming up. How do you get them into this position?
Yeah. Cara, one thing that stood out to me when you were telling your story of just even working with your daughter, like bringing your daughter to work and like instilling that passion. But I love it when you said science can be challenging, but it's not scary. And just that mindset of like, you can do this. Yes, it's challenging, right? We're all struggling, right? But this is something that you can do. And it's something that you can face and ask questions and get what you need and all of those things. And that stood out to me as we think about Jill's question of like getting women into STEM, right? Like it's funny, like I was in engineering, and the thing that people ask me, like when I think about women, but even like Black engineers, right? Because we struggle with getting Black engineers. I always tell my mentees is that I am a chemical engineer because I kept going. That's it. It's challenging for all of us. But only reason why I have this degree is because I decided to keep going. And so helping our girls understand that piece of it, of like, it's not going to be easy, but
Right.
you can do it. I've done it. We've all done it on this call, right? And women that are listening to us right now, whether it's live or on replay, like, we're doing it. You can too. You can do it too, if that is your passion, right? And that's what you want to spend your time doing right now.
Right. Yes. No. Well, kudos to you. Yeah. Chemical engineering is really a difficult major. So that's awesome.
Keep going.
Way to go.
To yourself. Keep going.
That, right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's just it. It's like, and I could have thrown in the towel when I, wasn't sure where I wanted to go. I thought, well, maybe I'll just do something different or anything like that. And yeah, you just got to keep going and have confidence in yourself. I think that's another thing. And I think a lot of people lack that, is that confidence.
Yeah. And, and as you say that, Kara, it reminds me that so often, right, there's kind of this stereotypical characteristics of what we think leaders are, or how they show up and what they should be. And I think especially as we're in this space with food safety culture going, gosh, and it's not just food safety culture, right? Culture in general. How do we shift it to be better and serve our team members better? Well, guess what? Leadership looks different than that classic model.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the more we consider what are the other gifts and competencies that leaders can bring and lean into, like, the more we'll start seeing cultures shift.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And,
yeah, absolutely.
Tia knows my soapbox on this, but I think the other part as women, as we go through roles, I think, like you said, especially, right, it's different when as families, when you are having kids, right? That's a whole different toll, but as individuals as well. And I think about, as we look at bringing women into leadership roles, more and more women, one of the things that can be a barrier is the expectations of the workload and number of hours.
Yes.
And I would really put a challenge out there to leaders, even those powerhouse women that we see all the time, like, how are we redesigning roles so that is not the barrier?
Yes.
All that's doing is weeding people out, good people out. And instead, like, how do we actually go, well, gosh, if I'm leading people, right, why am I working 80 hours a week?
Yeah.
Am I not working with my team well enough? Have I not developed them well enough? Have I not advocated well enough? Like, how do we help make a difference so those next generations coming in don't feel like they have to say, oh my gosh, I can either step into this new role or take this promotion, but I have to give up spending more time with my family or spending more time on my hobbies, or like, men shouldn't have to make those trade-offs either.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think about how, so that's my soapbox, but like, how can we do that? Because I think that's one of the things as women we tend to see as well, is that even with that female in food statistic, like, we get to this point where then the demands of work overtake and we say, maybe not for me.
Yeah.
We need to break through that. And that's where women who are those powerhouses that are already there can make a difference.
Yeah.
I agree. Yes. Agree. Yeah.
I think too, Jill, like, we've seen where the newer generations, they're not taking on as much as the generations before, right? They're saying, you know what, I'm going to prioritize my well-being. And they're doing it. Jill, I'll never forget when you were like, the generation now is behaving that way because we taught them to. Like, we taught them to value themselves and to put their passions first and to not take crap, right?
Don't sell your soul to work.
Exactly. We told them that, and now they're like, okay, that's what I'm going to do, right? And that's what I'm going to stand in. And organizations, they have to make that shift if they want to retain engaged people in their organization, because, like, we know, like we talked about a little earlier, it is good for business to have people there who are engaged.
Yes. Agreed. No, I like that. That's we taught them. We did.
It was like a light bulb when Jill said it. And I was like, I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, we then say those generations, right? And Granted, like there's some things we don't understand about other generations. That's just the way it is.
Lots.
But as we talk about what younger generations want as they enter the workforce, we are a part of that, right? We contributed to that stance because we've been there, right?
Yeah.
And learn from us, right? Like if I had to do it all back over, right? This is what I would have wished my organization supported, or that it was built in for my organization to support me in this way.
Right.
And they're just taking it and running with it.
Right.
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a really great point. And it, you know, kind of goes back to in my career with Virginia Dybel, where she's like, I can get a lot out of you. You have to work from home, but you know, we can make this work. And you know, what foresight, you know, and that was really you know, kind of a revolutionary. I mean, that was in 2005, so that was a while ago. So yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's really a great way of looking at it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And there's one more thing that you said that stood out to me, and it's around self-awareness, right? And I think we came back to it a few times, but it's understanding where your boundaries are and who you are as a leader and who you want to be as a leader, even without the title, right? It's that confidence of knowing yourself, right? And knowing where you can play really well, where you need a little bit more education, right? What you're not passionate about and don't want to do. All of that self-awareness is important. And one of the things that we do in our programs at Catalyst is that's where we start. So when we think about with boot camp, which starts February 6th, join us. A piece of that is understanding who you are at work, at home. How do these things interact with one another so that you can be a stronger leader for your organization and for yourself? And I think sometimes people try to make decisions, but they don't even really know themselves and how it relates to what they want. And then they fall into this space of being somewhere they might not want to be, right? Or trying to be like a leader that doesn't really fit who they are. And so, you know, that's one thing that we focus on. And one thing that is super important is understanding, who are you, right? Who do you want to be? What type of leader you want to be? And to Jill's earlier point, where, you know, sometimes we might not have a woman leader to look at, and everyone's trying to push us through this traditional male-centric leader in the organization. Sometimes that's hard to do if that's not who we are. And so I think that's just a reminder for women, is that we have to figure out who we are, right? And then figure out, how do we lead authentically as ourselves? Because we don't have to look like another woman leader. We don't have to look like our male leaders, right? We just need to look like ourselves and show up as ourselves, right? Because that's the viewpoint that organizations need.
Yes.
That's great. Yeah. Oh man, I wish I would have had your programs when I was 25 and trying to figure this all out.
Well, for all the 25 and 30-year-olds out there, that's why we're here, right?
Right.
It doesn't have to be that hard, and it doesn't have to take you till you're like my age, 50, to figure that stuff out if you've got some support and community around you. So
exactly.
Oh gosh, I know we could talk about this more, which is why I'm so glad you have the series coming up, Cara.
Yes.
So for someone who's listening, they're like, how do I get a hold of this series? How do I learn about it? Where should they go to find out more?
So our LinkedIn for ChemStation would have it. I believe our website has links too. Otherwise, email me. My email's right there. Or you can email our Eagle team at eagleteam@chemstation.com. We will get you links. We will get you signed up. It's going to be an amazing series, and I'm so excited. So please join the conversation.
We're excited about it.
Yes, yes. You know, and if you're looking at like, how do I kickstart and think about not just the technical side, but maybe the human side, or just get a fresh look on what 2024 is going to look like. Next Wednesday, instead of this real talk right here, we're hosting it for our vision board workshop on Zoom. So our links are all out there on our Catalyst page. Go on out there and like on our LinkedIn page, and I'm sure you will find a link to go, and we'll drop one in the chat for you as well.
Yes. And if you are ready to start focusing on your leadership skills and want to be a better leader than you are today, then join us at boot camp. We are kicking off our spring cohort on February 6th, and we would love to have you and your teams there. So you can also find that link on our LinkedIn, on our website. Reach out to Jill or myself. We're happy to send you more information about it.
Absolutely. Well, Cara, thank you so much for kicking the year off on Real Talk with us and for our audience. It's been awesome to talk about like your story and how do we bring women with us? How do we make this a space for everyone? And how do we look at just the whole well-being of people around us?
Yeah. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Like I said, it was an absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate the invitation. It was great talking to both of you. So,
Yes.
thank you so much.
And
Happy New Year.
Yes. Thank you to our audience for joining us, and we will see you next week at our vision board.
Yes, we will. Make it a great week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.